Now, by far, one of the more popular stands in all of JoJo has to be Johnny Joestar's Tusk, and its evolutions, that being Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and especially Act 4. The reason for this popularity is pretty obvious. It's the fact that, well, Act 4 has infinite punching power, and a lot of people really do like that swag/power factor in their protagonist's abilities. And you especially see that in my most popular video on this channel, that being the most terrifying stand's Tusk. While I think that video does a great job portraying Tusk in a very terrifying light, there is a problem with that video that I have. I completely undersold the meaning of Tusk and its evolutions. Granted though, I only really talked about it for 3 minutes, and it wasn't the primary focus of the video, but I feel like it needs to have some justice behind it, as I think Tusk and its evolutions have such a significant meaning for Johnny and SBR as a whole that open your eyes to the grander meaning of the story that Araki is trying to tell within Steel Ball Run, that I feel like I need to circumvent that mistake in the most terrifying stands here in this video. So I present to you the meaning behind Tusk and its evolutions. And oh, by the way, hello, my name is Metas. Walk with me. So before we look into Tusk and Johnny, I think what we have to do here is actually look at the core of the foundation of what made these two, stand user and stand. And of course, that's through the musical reference of Tusk the song and Tusk the album by Fleetwood Mac. In a general overview of what Tusk the album has to say is more or less, it is the band Fleetwood Mac's kind of figuring out the relationship as a group LP/album. For a lot of bands back in the day, this was very common, but this was one of the more popular bands of all time, going through a very hard time in their band's relationship. So the album, for the most part, does represent figuring out how to personally get through all these relationship problems and figure out everything almost individually. On top of that, it also has to deal with a lot of romance, a lot of, you know, why are you in bed with this guy? Why don't you love me? Like complex social issues between people is what this album more or less represents as a whole. So I recommend, if you really want to know what Tusk and what Araki was kind of thinking about when making this stand, is to go listen to the album yourself. I think this album is very good. I don't think it's Fleetwood Mac's best, but it's definitely a very good listen. However, when it comes to its overall meaning and applying that into a character, I think it's probably overall Araki's best decision when it comes to that. And the whole idea of figuring out relationships, how to move on past that, like the aftermath of a group breaking up or a critical event in your life, and you have to go through that or move past through that, is ultimately very good, and that idea is put onto Johnny, as you'll see over the course of this video and just over the story of Steel Ball Run and Johnny. This is what he's going through. He's going through a lot of personal issues with himself, his relationships with other people, figuring out how to interact with Gyro and the cast of Steel Ball Run for the most part. So if anything, it's not really a reference to Tusk the stand, it's more of a reference to Johnny as a character, but by proxy of that, the evolution of Tusk shows the evolution of how Fleetwood Mac eventually grew from their problems of the previous album, going on, moving forward through that, through Tusk, and then afterwards through that. So that's more or less what the album meaning represents through Johnny and Tusk. Now, the song Tusk might also have a little bit of influence here. Now, in my original video talking about it in the most terrifying stands, I did bring it up. Now, of course, I didn't know about the album beforehand in that video, which is a total mess up on my part, my bad. But I still think the individual song itself actually has a meaning here. Now, of course, within that song itself, there is some relationship issues going on and a whole bunch of other stuff. However, in that song itself, nothing is resolved. It's just a whole like, why did you cheat on me? Yada, yada, yada. And eventually, you know, of course, the song over the period of time it's going on for doesn't really solve that until the next songs after that. However, at the very end, on a musical instrument note, is the idea that throughout the course of the song, a lot of the vocals, the drums, the horns, the background vocals, separate from the original vocals, are all independent of each other. But by the end of the song, similar to Tusk Act 4, they all eventually culminate together in making kind of a perfect unison or the full act of the song meeting all together at the very end. So I think to some point the idea of Tusk Act 1, 2, and 3, and 4 come from the idea of the individual song itself, eventually leading to that grand moment where everything comes together. So more or less, Tusk the Stand is kind of influenced by the evolution or acts through Tusk the song, while Johnny is inspired through his character by Tusk the album. Here's an announcement in between parts. I have a Patreon now on top of a channel membership where I will be posting exclusive content too. So if you're interested in me and what I want to do past YouTube, consider supporting. Thank you. So with the core foundation of the musical reference out of the way, let's talk Johnny and Tusk. So who is Jonathan Johnny Joestar before the events of Steel Ball Run Chapter 1? We can determine from the early adolescent years of Johnny that he is a traumatized child who eventually ends up becoming a very snobby, rich, aristocratic type brat. That is mostly due in part to the fact that Johnny eventually, after the death of his brother, becomes a very, very, very good horse racer. Not the best, because of course Diego will always beat him at that, but he becomes pretty successful. Because of this, Johnny's ego would grow tremendously and would not be corrected by his parents at all. If anything, it is ultimately worsened by them, in specific here with his father, George Joestar, in the death of his child, that being Nicholas Joestar. All of George's hatred, pain, loss, and ultimately all of his negative emotions are put onto Johnny, worsening the relationship between the both of them for the foreseeable future. The social status of Johnny at this time is good. He would consider himself in the green, but like I said previously, Johnny had an unchecked ego, and unchecked egos can worsen things dramatically, and of course that does happen. In a classic tale of Icarus flying too close to the sun, he loses his wings and dies. The same goes with Johnny. However, he does not lose his wings, but he loses the ability to walk after cheating a man out of a spot waiting in line. Johnny's life is ruined, from rich and famous to poor and uncared for, which leads us to the beginning of Steel Ball Run, where we get the classic quote of, この物語は僕が歩き出す物語だ。肉体がという意味ではなく、青春から大人という意味で。Johnny here is starting from a point so far behind zero that Gyro Zeppeli states that it would be superhuman to get out of the position he is currently in. But despite that massive wall, Johnny Joestar overcomes that throughout the entirety of Steel Ball Run. And it was a process, and that process is best seen through Tusk and its evolutions. Tusk Act 1 is awakened when Johnny crosses the Devil Palm with Gyro for the first time, simultaneously also acquiring one of the corpse parts of Jesus Christ, the man who is known to help the disabled. Now, purely looking at Tusk Act 1 and what it can do, it is clear on the surface level discussion that this thing is supposed to represent a child or a baby or something that is in its infancy. Past appearance wise, when you look deeper into its ability, it quite literally is a child. It's trying to mimic the adult here, that being Gyro and his ability to use the spin. While Johnny can spin his nails to cleave off limbs, it is a poor imitation of what the spin can truly do. Johnny here is just purely using it for destructive capabilities and not fully realizing what the spin can actually do at its full potential. Johnny's current goals at the current moment in time when he does have Act 1 is learning how to walk. However, Johnny isn't trying to learn that. Through Act 1, we see Johnny's actual mentality right now, just trying to gain the spin the fastest way possible so he can learn how to walk. When in reality, that's not how you properly, solve your current problem, and that's not how you use the spin. There's the right way, and then there's the easy way, and the easy way will not allow you to get what you want here. That is ultimately learned when we get to Tusk Act 2. During the fight with Soundman, Gyro gives Johnny a major piece of knowledge here: how to properly use the spin and where it comes from, aka paying your respects. One of the major lessons Gyro teaches Johnny on the pathway from adolescence to manhood. In a desperate moment where Gyro is critically wounded, Johnny finds the golden spin throughout nature, and in doing so, Act 2 is born. While Act 1 could cleave through limbs, Act 2 is a completely different monster that is following the line of infinity the Zeppelis are trying to chase after, thanks to the spin. Act 2 has the ability to fire out bullets that make holes that can possibly spin forever, tracking enemies effortlessly into pursuit to ultimately kill them. This ability is so good it makes Act 1 obsolete and becomes Johnny's default stand throughout the rest of Steel Ball Run. While Act 2 is several times more powerful than Act 1, making it pretty obvious why it becomes the default for Johnny for the rest of the part moving on forward, there's actually more meaning behind this that I think a lot of people overlook. When Johnny pays his respects to the Zeppellis and their family history and how they actually utilize the spin properly, he's also simultaneously paying respects to his own past, learning to overcome them, and saying how that foundation, that past trauma, can build you up to become something stronger. And with that strength, you will never regress to your previous act. But Act 2 also symbolizes something else, that this is a personal story. While Johnny is using the golden spin that the Zeppellis invented so many years previous to Steel Ball Run, Johnny is using it in his own unique way. While Gyro is helping Johnny through the same lessons he learned throughout life, Johnny is behind but parallel to him. He is not an exact copy of Gyro. He is learning and growing in a different way through the same lessons. And that is clearly evident and shown through what Act 2 can do, because let's be frank here, Gyro never does what Johnny does, because this is a story of personal growth and is something that even I, on a day-to-day basis, try to replicate. This is probably one of the greatest life lessons Araki puts in his own story, like point blank period. I feel like everybody can grow from this by paying your respects. But this isn't the end of Johnny and Tusk's story, as in later on in Civil War, Tusk Act 3 is born. By far the most insane moment in, I would say, all of JoJo. Jesus Christ of Nazareth shows up to give a pep talk to Johnny in the form of, "If your heart is wavering, Johnny Joestar, do not shoot." Listen well, if your heart is wavering, then do not shoot, because then the door to the new path will be open to you. The context in why Jesus is saying this to Johnny is because Johnny is quite literally fighting his past sin thanks to the stand Civil War, making them physically manifest. Act 2 is not enough here. It is limited to what it can shoot and do in the current point in time. Johnny needs something more. This is where Jesus shows up to tell him there is something more beyond what your current state can do. So if he can't shoot Axl Rowe, he can't shoot Gyro, he can't shoot his past sins, why not shoot yourself? If your heart is not wavering to that action, you might as well. And in that critical moment, in that critical decision, Johnny Joestar unlocks Tusk Act 3, a stand that lets him traverse any surface by placing him within his own spiral bullet, giving him omnidirectional shooting. On top of that, Gyro then proceeds to say this is a path no Zeppeli with a spin has ever gone through before, that the implication that the bullet hole within its spiral is truly infinite. Johnny, by paying his respects, overcoming his past trauma and sin, has unlocked something so beyond some could consider him a whole new being. A boy who is no longer parallel to Gyro and is kind of following his own walk of life now, with a lesson learned that if your heart does not waver, that must be the new path you must take. This is such a crazy revelation that when Johnny is trying to destroy the corpse by pushing it through his bullet hole, which will infinitely destroy anything that goes within it, that some people think this is character regression from the previous arc where he learns to let go, when in fact that's not the case at all. I've seen people misinterpret this part or this action so heavily over the years that it's kind of pissing me off. It's not Johnny being greedy, it's Johnny realizing that if the corpse is destroyed in this very moment, it will be the same reality or the same outcome as if he gets it all. And it's not like Jesus is telling Johnny, don't destroy my corpse, that's not the right path. Jesus doesn't show up again. The message is clear here. If your heart does not waver in destroying the corpse parts, it is probably the right path, as it's more than likely a net positive or a net neutral for everybody involved in the Steel Ball Run race. Johnny literally and metaphorically has the ability to move in any direction now. All paths now lead to the ending of Steel Ball Run. Tusk Act 4, The Sacrifice. Funny Valentine has now obtained the full corpse of Jesus Christ through Lucy Steele. In doing so, D4C evolves into D4C Love Train. The only option now, in order to defeat somebody who has become an immovable object, is to use an ancient Zeppeli spinning technique. At its highest power, is so potent that it can get through any defense. And this isn't a joke. As Johnny and Gyro get accustomed to the super spin atop of their horses, their abilities slowly penetrate the light barrier of D4C Love Train without Funny Valentine noticing. However, in a fault not of Gyro's making, at least not intentionally, Gyro's steel balls were not perfectly shaped, leading to the eventuality that Funny Valentine noticed how it worked. And with Gyro's life already being so close to death, thanks to the redirection of misfortune placed on top of him, Gyro would sadly perish. In a rush of emotions, Johnny Joestar wouldn't know what to do. His mentor are now dead, and the situation now looking bleak. It really does look like Johnny has truly lost against Funny Valentine and D4C Love Train. However, Gyro left a piece of information before his death. The shortest route was our detour. It was a detour. That was our shortest path. In that piece of information, Johnny comes up with the idea of using his steel ball on top of Slow Dancer to kick him. Because of that, and using the horse's energy in that kick allows him to activate the super spin, activating and transforming Tusk Act 3 into Tusk Act 4. In doing so, we get the classic scene of Tusk Act 4 fucking prying open that goddamn light barrier and saying, "Shimmy me!" and then fucking rocking Funny Valentine shit. Learning the lesson that shortcuts do lead to some success. However, though, in this case, it did require a sacrifice, that being the life of Gyro Zeppeli. Johnny has gone through a lot of hardship through Steel Ball Run. He has learned a lot of crucial lessons that I think a lot of people can learn from. Johnny's personal life story from start to end is something that we can all learn from, as Steel Ball Run throughout its publication is a story of self-growth. And when presented the opportunity to bring Gyro back through Funny Valentine's latent abilities, Johnny does not accept it, as the Gyro the Funny Valentine could bring back won't be his Gyro, not even close. While a Tusk Act 1 Johnny would have easily sacrificed anything to bring back Gyro, a Tusk Act 4 Johnny knows better. He knows his friend is truly gone, and while it's hard to swallow that truth, the current Johnny we see can do that, even if it's painful. And in the end, Johnny finishes off Funny Valentine. However, it isn't over for the infinite punching power of Tusk Act 4 and Johnny, as they still have to fight Parallel World Diego and his The World. In said fight, Diego does beat Johnny yet again. However, the outcome of this leads to Johnny personally winning. Diego's mentality of winning and losing, similar to Valentine, leads to his death. Even though he beat Johnny, it's ultimately meaningless because his greed led to Lucy Steele killing him. And by all metrics, she is kind of powerless or less comparable to him, but is still able to beat him. While on the other side, Johnny loses, but is able to overcome his own infinite rotation and is still able to live a long life afterwards, or at least relatively long, because his own greed eventually does him in. However, it wasn't for himself though, it was for somebody else, somebody that he loved very dearly, something a Johnny, before even gaining his Tusk Act 1, would have never done. I have to say overall, the grander idea of Tusk and Johnny here is the idea of personal struggle and overcoming that through a lot of looking deep within inside yourself and looking at other people and how they deal with life is what I feel like what Rocky is trying to present here with Johnny. Because when you see Act 1 Johnny, you see somebody who is, oh God, somebody who's destroyed, broken at his lowest possible level. Personally, Johnny saying himself in the negative, in the red, right? Who over the course of the entire part, going through Act 1, 2, 3, then 4, you see him change as a person. I think you see the most dramatic change in Act 3 personally, where he now has this motivation and desire that when his heart is not wavering, he basically knows that he is right and he can do this action without anything clouding him. And Act 1 Johnny wouldn't be capable of that, right? And of course, when you look at Act 4, for example here, the fact that he's not greedy and doesn't want to bring back another Gyro to interact in his world with him ultimately means that he has come not full circle, but has evolved just like his Tusk, right? Where he knows that it won't be his same Gyro. Gyro's gone. He has to deal with that. He has to deal with that pain, that loss, and struggle again, and he just has to overcome it. That's beautiful. That's what Tusk is. Tusk and Johnny represent overcoming the struggle and not reverting back to your previous mistakes. Steel Ball Run overall is a story of self-progression, and this is ultimately seen through the progress of Tusk and Johnny. Now, of course, you can start picking out a whole bunch of examples, but of course, I like 3 and 4 the best because I think that's where Johnny really excels as a character. You really get into his character because when he gives that talk to Gyro about being in the negative, even though he's been through so much, it means a hell of a lot when at the very end, fighting Valentine, he goes, I can't bring Gyro back because it won't be my Gyro, and that's okay. But I can still beat your ass and still be able to live a long life after that. And while I didn't really necessarily bring it out through this video because I wanted to stick to SBR for the most part, the fact that Johnny eventually kind of sacrifices himself and is greedy for other people in order to save their lives in part 8 is ultimately really telling of where his character really is, because it honestly means at the end of the day, Johnny went from a selfish, aristocratic asshole to a selfless, good-hearted man who would do anything to protect his family and his friends if given the opportunity. And because of that, I think I have to personally say, at least saying this on camera, that I think Johnny and Tusk have to be some of my favorite characters and favorite stands in the entire franchise. Stand or stand? I think it's probably stand, but it's ultimately beautiful, and I see a lot of love and care that Araki put into it here that I think needs to be expressed, and I think I did a pretty decent job at it. And if you guys have any interpretation or takes that you want to say in the comments, please write them down. I'd love to read them. So with that all being said, like, comment, share, subscribe. Go over on Patreon to see a different musical background to this video where I use Fleetwood Mac songs to kind of elevate the video. So if you're interested in that, please go support. Stay hydrated, and I will see you in the next one. Deuces.